Hello, everybody, and thank you for your patience. Took a little time before we could get started. Get to know your audience. That's always a good thing at the beginning of a talk. I will spend now the next 30 minutes talking about grave markers. So it would be interesting just as a quick checkup. You're all aware what a grave marker is? Is there any? Okay, I see nodding heads. Is anyone, any doubts or what this will be about? Second question, anyone ever worked with grave markers? We got a few hands up there, but most of the people actually know, except Hafen, right? Look at that. Back up here. Oh, it's for our online audience or for our... Okay, good. I'll try to do my best here. Okay. So maybe before I get started, a couple of words about why I want to talk about this topic and what my argumentation is in this. No, let's start the other way, sorry. Let's flip the image. So my name is Heiner Zimmermann. I'm from Germany, and I was born in a blacksmith family. So on this photo, you actually see my father. That is now over 70 years a blacksmith. And his father was a blacksmith too, so I'm in the third generation. And that is my first occupation, being a blacksmith. But I'm also working since the last 15 years at the university in Gothenburg as a professor, where I'm leading with my dear colleagues a program not exclusively for blacksmithing, but for the big world of metal. I wanted to show my dad because he was someone that worked with this topic of grave markers from very early on. And I think some of the colleagues that are here know him, and he sends his best regards at this point. All right, let's hop on to the next one. I'm trying to create an argument for you, and I want to discuss with you a topic that I feel like is relevant for us people that work within the blacksmithing. And the question is, historically, the grave markers or the forged grave markers played a role. And you see here an image. This is from, I think it was 1637. It's an image of a monastery actually in Germany, southern Germany. And if you would see it better, you would actually see forged grave markers in that front area of this image. Why I'm pulling up this image is that's the oldest visual image I could find on forged grave markers. That proves the point that we blacksmiths had actually a role within graveyards. We know today that, of course, forged metal, but next to other materials such as stone, wood, and so on, you will find historically on grave markers. If we move to the next one. We actually have leftover grave markers from the medieval age, so we speak 12th century. So we know that already 600 years ago, we were forging grave crosses or grave markers. And we also know today that you will find forged grave markers worldwide. So of course it's connected with Christianity, so you will find in the US, you actually find also in Asia, historic forged grave markers. That's an image of today. And this image is taken now from where I live in Germany. But I've been around and looked at quite a lot of graveyards, including the one here in Stia, Finland, England, and so on. And I think it represents really well what you will find today on a graveyard. It's stone that is dominating mostly the graveyards today. Can you agree in that? I mean, you all come from different areas. I see some nodding heads. So something happened, right? Something happened during the history now that we played a significant role within this culture. But it's gone, or mostly gone. We know that, around the Alps, like, southern Germany, Austria, northern Italy, it's still present. But the rest of the world, you will not find a lot of forged grave crosses anymore. The reason for this, there's not... Sorry? No, I did not. Is it still active there? What, one person, sorry. You speak for the entire Russian area or for certain areas? Okay. Thank you. And you wanted to confirm that? Yeah. Okay. So it's also still present, but it's declining. Okay. But it would be interesting to see how they could keep that culture alive more than other areas. Paul? Yeah. Yeah. Of course, you will find also cast pieces, some industrial-made ones. But if you look at the whole image, you will always have the stone being very dominant in there. And for me, it's actually not so important why we lost the ground. For me, it's more important, why did we not manage to reclaim that market? I mean, you know, we as Blacksmith have a lot of qualities in the work we do, and I will speak about that in a moment. Why have we not managed to get this arena back to us? Does anyone have any ideas why we didn't manage to? What? As an example, can you go back an image? Back? Yeah. Random stone, okay? Little polished with maybe handmade, chiseled in, between 6.5 and 7,000 euros. Can you make a forged metal piece for that money? I can. So I don't think forged metal work is more expensive than nowadays what they cost, you know. But it's a good argument. Do you have any other arguments why we didn't manage to have some other hands? Yeah. So in Finland, it's kind of a lobby between the undertakers and how they. Yeah. Other ideas? Sorry? Mm-hmm. 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 Good thought. And maybe one more here. You know, like maintenance, or like that when it's built, it needs more like painting every 2 years. Mm. I have another argument. My dad made grave markers now 30 years ago, and it did not need a single paintbrush. So maybe it depends on also on the architecture, the design of the piece, but yeah. Okay, one more. Kill, you had something? No, sorry. Oh, maintenance, okay. It might be, but I can't confirm that from my practice. And one more. Yeah. So it's to be, you know, expose our qualities and what we can do for the audience or for the potential customer. That is kind of like my experience very much, once they see what's possible. A lot of people react when they see metalwork like, oh, that's possible too. So anyway, but there might be many different reasons. But let's go forward. Yeah. I want to give you some very good arguments why I think it's good that you look back into this market. And I want to start from very different angle. I want to speak about, the practical aspects. And, working with grave markers, it's a perfect size for a one-man show, one-woman show, sorry, to be correct. So, the scale of it is so easy to transport. It's big enough that you have one person that deals with that. Very different if you make bigger scale work, ideally from that point of view. Can you go back? Calculation risk. For everyone that runs a company knows what that means. So you don't have to worry about drilling through a hole of insulation 20 centimeters, or you know what you're dealing with, you know how it's going to be set up. So it's a lot of safety around that. No? Go back. Yeah, sorry. I'll tell you when you can move. Payment morale. I want to bring that up too. I never had a customer that didn't want to pay the bill at the end. It was well communicated, but it's an emotional moment for them. So it's, I don't know, the ones that run companies will maybe know what it is when customers don't pay. It does happen, but you will rarely find it there. Local market. I mean, you don't have to drive across your whole country to deliver the work. You have a graveyard in front of your workshop. Like every village got a graveyard, and maybe then the next village too. I think the furthest distance I drive to do grave markers might be 10 kilometers. And within that range, I have 8 graveyards I deliver. So local markets, long-term demand, yes. And you will also, now during the economy crisis that we have, I never feel any crisis, whatever it is, if it's the real estate bubble that collides, or the delivery chain, or the energy, that's a market that's just consistent. And independence from industry, and of course the artistic freedom. I think that's something we should be most interested in. You have a lot of freedom. You work with the people that lost someone, and it's just between you and them how you generate a piece. It's very different when you work with an architect, believe me, or if you work for designers, you have much more restrictions to that. But those are all aspects that I'm actually not so interested in, but I just wanted to bring it up to get it off the table. I want to talk, now we can go. I want to talk about aspects that I want to explain quickly on this piece here. This was actually a grave cross that I did some years back for Arthur. Arthur was a baby that was never born, so it died actually before it was born, a few days before its predicted birth. We call them star childs because they never saw the daylight. And I worked together with his mother. And now you have to ask yourself, well, Arthur was never born, right? Did he have now a life that's worth remembering? For the mother, it was very clear. She wanted to remember Arthur because as a child she expected to have, and she already started, to build the children's room. She started to buy toys and clothing. So for her, it was very important, and it paid me a lesson. It paid me a lesson that the grave markers are not for the departed person. It's for us to remember these people. So our customers actually in grave markers are the people that are still alive. And now I can. So for me, I want to speak a little bit about the emotional relevance of working with grave markers, the local and cultural relevance, and last not least, the social relevance. Let's get started. By the way, do you keep an eye on my time so I know a little bit how? Okay, I need to hurry, right? That's why you were flipping through my images. Okay, good. I can skip a little bit again. Good. I want to explain quickly how my father got into this. And here you see an image of my family. So you see my grandfather, grandmother, my uncle, and my dad. So Prova. Thank you. Back online. I explained to you earlier that my grandfather was a blacksmith too, and when he passed away, at the time, our graveyard looked like the image I showed you. It was pure stones. And my uncle being a blacksmith, my dad being a blacksmith, they discussed about, so what are we going to choose as the last visual symbol of our father? And they felt like we can't put a rock there if he was a blacksmith like we are. We're a blacksmith family. So they decided that they wanted to forge a piece together. At the time, we all thought it's not possible, but it's actually possible. There are no rules. Well, there are rules on graveyards, but they're not like rules made from the government. It's very individual of the graveyard. So after consultation, they allowed us to do something in metal. So that was the first piece they did, and I don't want to go into explaining why it looks the way it looks. That maybe it's another talk. But we set that up, so it was a very personal decision to make that piece. And all of a sudden, other people saw that and said, is that possible too? And that started our market. It started slow, you know, but over a period of 5 years, we all of a sudden had like 5 grave markers every year. Now we have a demand of 20 grave markers a year. So it's possible to start a market or re-establish a market here. And we are not the only example. I have several examples of alumni of our program, but also of colleagues in the US, for instance, that started this market, mostly through something very personal. A family member passed away, for instance, and they started a market and managed to do so. Okay, we continue. So I want to talk about a few examples of grave markers, because I feel like if we're just going to try to make now grave markers that kind of like mimic what the stone makers do in metal, we're not doing a good job. I think we should look into new concepts of grave markers. And one concept is that we look back in history and learn from our culture, traditions, and rituals. And this is an example of where I come from. Those are wooden boards, and they were used during the turn of the century where I lived, because people had very little money. So when someone passed away, they carried him on the best board, wooden board they could find in the barn. They carried the dead body to the graveyard, and after they buried him, they left a piece of wood there and just carved the name in. We call it death boards. And that's still a ritual, or that's still a tradition that people remember, even though we hardly have any left. So we use this topic, and we can go on. We use this topic in metal. So we're using that kind of theme and interpret it in metal. That's actually a piece that my father made, and it's also his grave sign. So he already made his own grave sign. He's alive, he's fit, he's healthy, sends his regards, but he made his own piece during a period where he was still physically strong that he could do it. We continue. Another example how you can learn from culture. This is a traditional Swedish grave cross, and you will still find like historic pieces over Sweden. And if you go on, this is a modern interpretation of one of my colleagues from Sweden, Janne Hilmarsson. So, you know, that's very close, like you look back into your own heritage, you learn from there and try to find a modern interpretation. Let's go on. Another example, you know about grave goods. So like, you know, the Egyptians, for instance, when they buried the pharaoh, they always put in lots of items and objects, mostly precious stuff. Same with the Vikings, same with the Celts. That's an example of the Celt. They gave in like goods to kind of like, you know, have that person, wherever they're going to go to, starting wealthy. And that's something we also picked up, and you can move on. That's an image of a graveyard today, and it's a little hard to see, but you see lots of little things people brought from home, you know, toys or memories of that person, and they placed it in a graveyard. So it seems to be a necessity for people that they can bring something to the graveyard and kind of like honor that person. And if we go on, that is actually an example here from a colleague of mine, Bianca Fatler. She did a grave sign where you had these marble pieces. They were symbolic like the seeds of that flower. And you can take them home as a memory of that person, but you can also bring some to the place. So a small ritual. And that's for me one of these examples where we blacksmiths can go a step further than people nowadays work with stone, for instance, or with wood. We create a ritual around the piece we do. And believe me, this is a real big need within society. So you will have open ears and a lot of acceptance from your customers if you promote these kind of rituals. Let's go on. That's a piece that we did. Similar idea behind this, but you can't see it. Behind this plate is a small secret chamber where we placed from the departed person her favorite jewelry piece and her favorite perfume. And we also placed 2 letters. There were goodbye letters from her husband and her son because she passed away very suddenly and they didn't have time to say goodbye. So another thing, that has not much to do with blacksmithing, but we can work with these kind of topics. We move on. I want to talk a little about the social aspects, like the integration of the people within the design, but with also maybe even creating the grave cross. So we call this co-design. I don't know, Yoko, you've been doing grave signs, Antti, you've done that. How much do you integrate the people in the process of designing the piece? Mm. Yeah. That's an interesting way you explained this. So we're marking a moment in that person's life with a transition. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm going to come to that, yeah. So this is an example of a blacksmith in Togo. When someone passes away there, the first thing that happens is that the entire family will go and see the blacksmith. And then together with the blacksmith and the entire family, they forge a shovel. So they create a shovel they will use then again to dig the hole where they're going to bury the body. So they create one tool with one function to bury that person. And after that person is buried, they're going to stick it in as a grave marker. If we go on. Another example on how to integrate society within that. This is, they call it spirit homes, and it's a Canadian culture. It's actually a mix of the natives and Christianism. Their belief is if someone passes away and you bury that person, it will take some time before the spirit can actually get released. Therefore, they're building a spirit home. So the spirit has a place to live in for a certain time. And when someone passes, go back. When someone passes away, the whole family comes together and they create together those little houses. So from the youngest to the oldest, they build that and they paint that together, and then they place it over the burial site. And from that moment on, they never touch it again. They let it go decay. So it won't be painted again because they believe after time the spirit managed to release themselves. Okay, so examples from the blacksmith world. This is a piece for a carpenter. And when they passed away, we asked their kids, which were also carpenter, if they could do something. So they came together and created the wooden pieces here. And they took like 4 weeks every weekend to do these pieces. And they used all the techniques they learned from their grandfather that was also a carpenter. Our job was just to do the lettering. So if you look at that, we had the minimum work, they had the maximum work, But it was not about working costs. It was for them kind of a healing moment. You go on. Another example, I was also a carpenter that passed away rather early on an infection. And this was the last wooden piece he worked on, and he didn't finish it. And I talked to the parents, and his father was so fascinated by his son because he was so talented with his hands. He had so fantastic skills, and himself said he didn't have hand skills. He kind of like had two left hands. That's an impression for not being very skillful with your hands. So I asked him if he would be willing to carve in the dates of his son when he was born and when he died. And it's hard to see on this image, but they, technically look very bad. And it took the father over 8 weeks to carve it in. But it's not important how well it's executed. The importance was how important that healing moment was for the father. Continue. So coming back to that, nowadays I even go so far that I offer my customers that they can come in and create that grave markers together with me. So when they come in, they're not skilled, right? So I try to find ways how they can help me working on those grave markers. And it takes extra time actually for me. It would be much more efficient if I do it myself. So this is extra work. But this is also an extra service that then again, when we come to the price, I never had a negotiation about my price being too high. And I nowadays ask between 6,500 and 12,000 euros for one of those work. I'm offering more than just a grave marker. I'm offering healing. And I think that is something, a quality that we all have. We're actually very good with people. We have a very interesting craft where we can invite people in. Let's go on. How important that is another example. And I'm going to jump now very quickly because my time is, I'm doing okay. 6 minutes, okay. This is a grave sign, and it's hard to read for you guys. It says Douglas Adams. Anyone rings a bell? Douglas Adams? 42, right? He's an author. He wrote Hitchhiker's Guide Through the Galaxy. And I think this is in London. Do we have some Hereford students here? Is it in London, that one? Yeah. And you have a lot of people visiting that grave every year, and they're going to bring a pen because they want him to continue writing, and they leave a note. It shows how important it is for society to have these moments where you can mourn, even though you're maybe not family. Let's go on. That's another example from Britain. That was actually a clown during the 19th century. And I found it interesting as an example because he made people laugh through the instruments he was playing. I don't know if Hereford knows the guy. I never knew about him, but I found interesting how they solved his grave. It's an instrument. So when you jump on his grave, you actually create sound. It's not a blacksmith example, but it's a way how to integrate people. We're gone. A few more examples that are not made by blacksmiths, but maybe inspires you to find a new idea. This is a little house with like dolls inside. So when you visit the person, you can play with that person for a little bit. The person that passed away was very young and left behind those dolls. So you come, and when you want to remember this person, you play a little bit with that person. Is that strange? I don't think so. I think it's really living that morning. I think it's very strange what we developed within that graveyard culture today, where someone passes away and then you give it very quickly away to the undertaker, and then you meet that person again, like your father or someone really important to you, when they bury that person. And often with makeup on that, you even don't recognize that person. I find that very strange. I find this very human. Let's go on. This can go very bizarre ways. So make up your own conclusion. You can ask the spirit for answers if you like, or play a little game with them. We continue. Any Andy Warhol fans here? Oh, we have a couple, 3, good. So if you ever want to, mourn with Andy Warhol and pay me your respect, you have the possibility now. Go on that link and continue. It gets you to a live cam. And you can scan in on his grave, and then at the right moment, you press a button, and you make a pop art image from his grave. I mean, how much closer can you be at an artist that was your role model? So that's one of the early examples how the digital world comes into the grave markers environment, and we can continue. It goes nowadays partly so far that you don't have a gravestone anymore, it's just a monitor, and the monitor connects you to like a website. But, continue. This is actually a blacksmith, Gustav Kengut, that used that too. So it's a forged element, but he has the QR codes on it, and the QR codes get you on a website. So we can work with that too. We can take that to our advantage. Now, nowadays, I don't know, who is on Facebook from you guys? So we still have a lot of Facebook. You remember what happens if any of your friends on Facebook passes away? What happens with that page? Facebook switches that page into a memorial page, and it will remind you every year of that person. That's digital mourning. And that's something we need to think about too when we offer our grave signs. So not just, making a piece out of metal. Think further. Think how you can integrate all these trends today. Let's go on. So, coming slowly to an end. A graveyard is always kind of a section of our society. So of course you maybe have strong influences from churches, but you will also find subcultures on graveyards. Graveyards actually in a constant change. And you see how new trends come in there too. You will see, evidence of all kinds of subcultures and ideas. And because it's at the same time, it's such a strong historic heritage, we find at our program in Gothenburg University that this is so interesting that we want to work with that with our students. And if you continue. So we've been running for the last 12 years a course on grave markers. And Hill, I don't have your piece on here, but I had it on here earlier. Oh, is it on here? Oh yeah, here. That's a piece from Hill. Raise your hand. We ran this course, or we do run this course in the second term. That's a really strong challenge for our students, because they come in and want to find their own artistic voice. And then we challenge them with making a piece for someone departed and not for themselves. But I have to say, we have clever students, not to say that Hereford or Estonia are not clever students, but they come up with very interesting ideas. Something that we professionals then again can learn from that. If you're interested to see a little bit more of what our students did, yeah. So we have a cooperation with a graveyard in Trollhättan, and they are displayed there. But it's kind of a show area, so there's not actually someone buried. But we have now 3 grave signs from students that they afterwards used for family members. We do have some students that actually work now with grave markers too, which I think is a fantastic reward for us to see that continues. So if you're interested, go on the website, you'll find some more with a little bit of explanation. Let's continue. Now, if I manage now to spark your interest about grave markers, then we're having a conference coming up already in 6 weeks. And it's a conference where we're going to discuss grave markers, where we show good practice examples, where we discuss even more though what would help you guys to start establishing grave markers wherever you come from. So if you feel like it's an interesting topic for you, please come and join. We do have flyers, and I know that Tobias is going to grab in my backpack in a moment. And we'll pull out those flyers and put them here. That's my colleague, by the way, Tobias. So save the date, come to Sweden. It's free of costs. We have talks, but we have lots of workshops too. It's a bit of a drive. and we're already hitting like 115 participants, so we're slowly getting at an end of our capacity. But if you're really feeling strong about that, you're more than welcome. Next one. If you cannot make it to our conference, for whatever reasons that I would know, you can still participate, because we're also offering a competition for grave markers. We're looking for 8 to 10 concepts about grave markers that combined the world of blacksmithing with all its quality, materiality, skill, form, with a topic of today. A topic of today can be climate change, recycling, diversity. I leave it up to you. So we want to challenge you as blacksmiths to say, create a grave marker that plays with a topic from today. And all you need to do is to bring up a concept on one page. So you don't have to do any drawings, you don't have to do a final piece. I appreciate your support. Even though you have the wrong t-shirt on, but it's okay. So all it takes is one page with your concept. And if we choose your concept, then we have money to help you to realize that concept. And that might be that you say, I have the skills, I can do it myself, so we pay you to make that piece. But it could also be that you say, hey, I have a fantastic idea, I have the skills but no workshop. Then we invite you with that money to come to our workshop in Sweden and realize your idea there. But maybe you say, I have a fantastic idea, but I don't have a workshop and I have no skills. Then we'll put you a blacksmith on your side, and we pay that blacksmith to help you to realize your idea. So don't feel like, if you're not per se a good blacksmith now, not to participate. It's about the concept that we're looking for. So, and with that, I'm coming to an end, because I said earlier I want to talk about some aspects. And I owe you still one aspect, and this is the emotional aspect, and I want to explain that. You continue that. For the ones that been for some time out there as a blacksmith and running a company, I think earlier or later, once you overcame the financial needs and you're finding your niche you want to work in, you will have this question coming up. What is my role in society? Because, in a way, I know blacksmiths, they can do fantastic ironwork, fantastic gates, for a price that they couldn't afford themselves. So they create products they cannot afford themselves. So are we creating one luxury item after the next, And that's when this question came up for me. What is my role in society? And I can explain that very well on this image here. And that was a moment in my workshop. The lady in the wheelchair, her husband passed away. And she ordered me to create a piece for her husband, but also that will be her piece, because she was already in her 90s. And because she couldn't come to my place to talk about that, her daughter, and that's the lady behind the wheelchair, brought her there. And she experienced how I had this interview with her and how I asked her about her husband and, that whole life story, and that she got also involved in it. And she talked also about, from her perspective as a daughter, about her father. And then on the third meeting, the youngest came. So we have now here 3 generations in that family that were developing with me this grave marker for her grandfather. And when they came at the end to look at the final result, before I galvanized it, they were looking at me and said, we talked about this many times with you, and we developed this idea together. So yesterday in our family we decided that this grave marker will become our family grave marker. It will be the place where our entire family, at least for those 3 generations, will be buried. And that was a moment for me where I said, if I have such a strong impact in society, beyond the financial things, I can actually shape a little bit of my culture, then I really feel like I landed where I wanted to land. Okay? Thank you very much for your time. A little bit of time for questions. Gil? Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. I understand the situation, and I could now start discussing with you what would be maybe options, brainstorm around that. You know, that's how we usually work. So what Phil said, you know, his situation is something that sounds like, how can we manage to get into that market with these kind of conditions? Yeah. Physical. Mhm. I agree. Mm. As a quick answer, but I actually would like to answer differently. We have the same situation in Germany, and I'm getting more and more requests to create a sculpture for the garden to memorize that person that somewhere anonymously was buried on the sea or somewhere in the mountains. Um, but I finish off with something else. The blacksmiths have shown historically that they reinvented themselves several times. So that will be for you maybe a task to find. We have an art historian here that will write about our project. So the blacksmiths managed to reinvent themselves over and over because we have one skill, and that's problem-solving skill. And you know all of that. How often do we solve problems in our work? And I believe this is our unmatched skill that will help us also to find solutions to these kind of problems or other problems. Okay? Anything else?